I discovered my fiancé was secretly married to another man the entire time we were together, and now both their families are suing me for emotional distress after I exposed them publicly. My name is Tom, 29M, and I thought I had finally found the love of my life. After 3 years together, I proposed to my fiancée, Emily, 28F, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had everything I'd ever wanted. She seemed perfect in every way, thoughtful, kind, and devoted. We made plans for our future, talked about starting a family, and even bought a house together. But my picture-perfect life came crashing down when I found out the truth. Emily was already married to another man. It started as a typical Saturday. I was scrolling through some paperwork on my laptop, trying to organize things for our upcoming wedding, when I noticed a document I didn't recognize. It was a marriage certificate dated over 5 years ago, with Emily's name on it, and someone else's. My heart pounded as I read the other name, Derek Wilson. I froze, staring at the screen, hoping it was some kind of mistake or maybe a cruel joke. But the details were undeniable. There was her full name, her birth date, and even her signature. Emily had been married this entire time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd gotten married a long time ago and never had the marriage annulled. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't make sense. I would have known. We'd been planning to get a marriage license, and she would have had to disclose this information. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, a horrible certainty that there was no way to explain this away. When Emily came home, I confronted her immediately. She looked shocked at first, her face going pale when she saw the document on my laptop screen. But then, almost as if a switch flipped, her expression turned cold. She admitted it without hesitation. Yes, she was married to Derek, and yes, she had been lying to me for years. The worst part? She didn't seem the least bit remorseful. Instead, she blamed me for finding out, saying that if I'd trusted her, I never would have known. I felt sick. She'd been leading a double life, and I'd been nothing more than a pawn in whatever twisted game she was playing. I had so many questions, but the only thing I could manage to ask was, why? She rolled her eyes, barely even looking at me as she muttered something about how it was none of my business, and then walked out. Just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my life. That night, I did something I normally would never have considered. I took to social media and posted about what had happened, tagging Emily and her husband Derek. I didn't go into detail, but I wanted people to know the truth, to know that this woman who had pretended to love me had been lying from the start. I didn't expect much to come of it. I just needed an outlet, a way to process the betrayal. But the post went viral overnight. By morning, it felt like the entire internet had seen it. Friends, family, strangers, they all reached out, offering support, expressing shock, and sharing their own stories of betrayal. I felt a strange sense of validation, like maybe I wasn't so alone in this nightmare. But that relief was short-lived. By the end of the day, I was getting messages from both Emily's and Derek's families, demanding that I take the post down and accusing me of ruining their lives. I ignored them, figuring they'd calm down eventually. But things only got worse. The following week, I received a letter from a lawyer representing both families. They were suing me for emotional distress, claiming that my public post had caused irreparable harm to their reputations. I was floored. They had betrayed me, lied to me, and yet somehow, I was the one being treated like the villain. I knew then that this was just the beginning of a much darker chapter in my life, and I'd have to fight tooth and nail to protect myself from the chaos Emily had unleashed. In the days that followed, I was bombarded with messages, not only from Emily's and Derek's families, but from strangers who'd somehow taken their side. They called me a homewrecker, a liar, and worse. Apparently, Emily and Derek's families had twisted the story, making it seem like I was the one who'd come between them, that I'd pursued Emily while knowing she was married. The betrayal stung even more now, knowing they'd gone so far as to smear my name to protect their own reputations. The lawsuit was serious. Their lawyer wasn't bluffing. I received court documents indicating they were seeking a substantial sum for emotional damages, citing my post as the cause of all their suffering. My stomach churned just reading the allegations. How was this happening? How had I gone from being a victim to being painted as the villain? I was a private person, not someone who liked to air dirty laundry, but it was clear I needed help. I reached out to my best friend, Kyle, for advice. Kyle had been my rock through thick and thin, and when he heard the whole story, he was livid. He urged me to fight back, to defend myself against these absurd accusations. He knew a good lawyer, someone who specialized in defamation and personal reputation cases, and set up a meeting for me. I hadn't wanted to drag anyone else into this, but at this point, I had no choice. At our first meeting, my lawyer Jenna listened intently, nodding as I detailed everything that had happened. She was sharp, confident, and most importantly, she believed me. She reassured me that we had a strong case, that Emily's and Derek's families were making baseless claims. Jenna also suggested something I hadn't considered. If they were suing me for emotional distress, I could countersue for fraud, for the emotional trauma Emily had inflicted by lying to me about her marital status. But Jenna warned me this would get messy. Emily and Derek's families were well connected, and they wouldn't hesitate to use every trick in the book to discredit me. I knew what I was up against, but I was prepared to fight. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and holding Emily accountable for her lies. While we prepared our defense, Jenna advised me to document everything. I spent days combing through old emails, text messages, and social media posts, looking for anything that could help prove my innocence. As I sifted through the memories, a dark realization began to dawn on me. Emily had always been secretive, always kept her phone on lockdown, always had a convenient excuse whenever I asked about her past. I'd brushed it off at the time, convinced myself that everyone has a right to privacy. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I saw the red flags for what they were. One night, I stumbled upon a series of messages that made my blood run cold. They were from the early days of our relationship, messages between Emily and Derek that she hadn't bothered to delete. They talked about their plan, how they'd keep things open between them while she strung me along. It was all there in black and white, a calculated scheme to use me as a pawn in their twisted relationship. They laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me, how clueless I was. Reading those words, I felt a surge of anger so intense, I thought I'd explode. I showed the messages to Jenna, and she immediately knew we had leverage. She filed a counterclaim for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. If they wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd show them I wasn't afraid to fight back. Jenna warned me to stay off social media, to keep my head down while the case moved forward. It was sound advice, but difficult to follow. Everywhere I went, I felt like people were judging me, like everyone had heard Emily's side of the story and decided I was guilty. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends I'd known for years turned their backs on me, unwilling to believe that sweet, innocent Emily could ever be capable of such deceit. But Kyle stuck by me, and so did Jenna. I focused on the case, on gathering evidence, on building my defense. I was determined to see this through to the end, no matter how painful it was. Then, out of nowhere, I received a message from Emily herself. She wanted to meet, to talk things over. I was wary, suspicious of her motives, but Jenna encouraged me to go. If Emily thought she could manipulate me again, she was in for a rude awakening. I agreed to meet her in a public place, somewhere I knew I'd be safe. When she arrived, she wore a mask of sorrow, her eyes filled with fake tears as she sat across from me. "Tom," she said, her voice trembling, "this has all been blown out of proportion. I never wanted things to get this bad. Can't we just work something out?" I nearly laughed in her face. Work something out? After everything she put me through? I kept my composure, though, and told her plainly that I had no intention of backing down. Her expression shifted, her crocodile tears replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "Fine," she hissed. "You want to play hardball? Go ahead. But just know, I won't make it easy for you. You're going to regret ever crossing me." With that, she stormed off, leaving me with a sense of dread. Emily wasn't finished. She'd fight dirty, use every weapon in her arsenal to destroy me. But I was ready. I knew this wouldn't be the end of the struggle, but rather the beginning of a brutal, drawn-out battle for my freedom, my reputation, and my sanity. After that meeting, I knew Emily was capable of anything. My lawyer, Jenna, had been right. This was going to get ugly. Sure enough, within days she started digging into my past, twisting every little thing she could find to paint me as the villain. Rumors started circulating that I'd been the abusive one, that I'd been controlling, that I'd driven her into the arms of another man. It was maddening watching her rewrite our history while I could do little but keep gathering evidence. One night, I got a message from an old friend, Greg. We hadn't talked in years, but he'd heard about the lawsuit and wanted to warn me. He said that Emily and Derek had started reaching out to mutual friends, people who didn't know the full story, spinning a web of lies to destroy my reputation before I even had a chance to defend myself. Greg said they were trying to dig up dirt, anything they could use to make me look like the unstable one. My phone buzzed constantly with hateful messages, accusations, and threats from strangers who'd somehow heard her twisted version of events. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, the weight of the whole situation pressing down on my chest. suffocating me. I'd never felt so helpless, so utterly alone. Jenna kept me focused, though. She reminded me that the more desperate Emily became, the more mistakes she'd make. And she was right. One day, while combing through my social media, Jenna noticed something strange. Emily had posted a throwback photo, one of her and Derek looking cozy from years ago. The problem? She captioned it with a date that fell smack in the middle of our relationship. The slip-up was small, but it was enough to prove she'd been involved with him the entire time she claimed she was loyal to me. We compiled this evidence along with the texts I'd found, piecing together a timeline that painted a very different picture from the one Emily was selling. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted total control, and I had no doubt she'd do whatever it took to get it. I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. Late one night, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a stranger, a private investigator hired by Emily. He handed me a thick envelope filled with photos of me going about my daily life, my every move tracked and documented. She'd been watching me, waiting for me to slip up, to give her something she could use. The intrusion was chilling, a reminder that no part of my life was safe from her prying eyes. I took the photos to Jenna the next morning. She wasn't surprised. "This is classic intimidation," she said, looking through the images with a critical eye. "She's trying to break you down, make you feel like there's no escape. But we can use this. Stalking is a criminal offense, and this just adds to our case." Despite the reassurance, the constant surveillance took its toll. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that at any moment, Emily could swoop in and tear my life apart again. I started avoiding places we used to go, stopped seeing friends who were still in touch with her, anything to cut ties with the past. But she had already burrowed into every corner of my life, and there was no erasing her entirely. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I received a subpoena from her family's lawyer. Emily and Derek were suing me not just for emotional distress, but now for defamation. They claimed my accusations were baseless, that I'd fabricated the entire story to tarnish their reputations. I wanted to scream, to break something, anything. It felt like I was drowning, with no way up for air. Jenna, however, was calm. She reminded me that we had evidence. "This is a scare tactic, Tom. They're hoping you'll fold, hoping the pressure will make you back down. But we're not getting up. Let them throw everything they have at us. We're prepared." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel as confident as she did. But Emily had pushed me to my limits, and I didn't know how much more I could take. Every day was a new nightmare, another attack on my character, another piece of my life that she tried to destroy. I was losing friends, losing sleep, and it felt like I was losing my mind. Then one evening, while I was scrolling through the barrage of hate on social media, I noticed a message request from an unfamiliar account. Curious, I opened it. The message read, "I know what they did. Meet me tomorrow. I have proof that can help you." Attached was an address and a time. It was risky, and I knew it could be a trap, but I was desperate. I messaged Jenna about it, and while she was wary, she understood that this could be the break we needed. I decided to go, armed with a recorder in the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally find a way out of this nightmare. The next day, I arrived at the address, a dingy coffee shop on the edge of town. I waited anxiously, scanning the room for anyone who might be my mysterious contact. After a few tense minutes, a man approached and slid into the seat across from me. He introduced himself as Ryan, a former friend of Derek's, someone who'd seen firsthand what they were capable of. He pulled out his phone and played a recording, Derek and Emily, laughing about the lawsuit, mocking me, bragging about how they were going to ruin me for daring to expose them. My heart pounded as I listened, my anger building with each word. This was it. This was the evidence I needed, the proof that they were manipulating everyone around them, playing the victim while secretly plotting my downfall. I thanked Ryan, shaking with a mixture of relief and rage. I took the recording to Jenna, who wasted no time incorporating it into our case. She assured me that this was exactly what we needed to turn the tide, that we could finally put an end to Emily's reign of terror. But I knew better than to think she'd go down quietly. Emily was cunning, relentless, and I had no doubt that she'd have one last trick up her sleeve. As I left Jenna's office, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I was no longer fighting blindly. I had allies, I had evidence, and I was ready to face whatever Emily threw at me next. This wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had a fighting chance. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was fighting back. With the recording in hand, I felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally gained some ground. But I also knew better than to celebrate too soon. Emily wasn't someone who'd go down without a fight, and I had no doubt she doubled down on her efforts to destroy me. My lawyer, Jenna, was just as cautious. She immediately filed a motion to introduce the recording as evidence, but she warned me that the process could take weeks, even months. In the meantime, we needed to brace ourselves for whatever backlash Emily would throw our way. She reminded me to stay low, avoid social media, and document any further contact or harassment from Emily or her supporters. I tried to follow her advice, but the tension was unbearable. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting the worst. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from old friends, co-workers, even distant relatives, all wanting to know if the rumors were true. Some offered sympathy, others scorned me for dragging Emily and Derek's names through the mud. It was exhausting, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on clearing my name, the constant barrage of accusations wore me down. Then, just as I'd feared, Emily struck back. I came home one evening to find a letter taped to my front door. It was a notice from her lawyer, informing me that she was pressing charges for harassment, claiming that I'd been stalking her and Derek, sending them threatening messages, and trying to sabotage their careers. My stomach churned as I read the letter, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. She was trying to flip the narrative, painting herself as the victim and me as the aggressor. I took the letter to Jenna the next morning, my frustration boiling over. How can she do this? She's the one who's been harassing me, not the other way around, I practically shouted, slamming the letter onto her desk. Jenna was calm, her gaze steely. It's all part of her strategy, Tom. She's trying to muddy the waters, make it look like both of you are at fault so the court won't take either side. But we have the recording, and we have evidence of her contacting you repeatedly. Just stay calm, and let me handle this. But staying calm was easier said than done. A few days later, I received an email from an anonymous sender containing a video of Emily sitting on the floor, her face bruised, her eyes red from crying. She was sobbing, pleading with the camera, claiming that I had abused her, that I'd threatened her life if she didn't drop the lawsuit. My blood ran cold as I watched her performance, horrified at how far she was willing to go to paint herself as the victim. I forwarded the video to Jenna, who assured me that it was an obvious setup, likely staged to gain sympathy. But it didn't matter. By the end of the day, the video was circulating on social media, and suddenly, everyone was talking about how I was a monster, a wife-beater, a cruel and violent man. The backlash was swift and brutal, and my phone exploded with hateful messages from people who believed every word of her story. The impact was devastating. My workplace placed me on indefinite leave, my friends stopped returning my calls, and even my family grew distant, unsure of what to believe. I felt isolated, abandoned, like the walls were closing in on me. Emily had managed to turn my entire world upside down, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the midst of the chaos, Ryan reached out again. He had more information, he said, something that could prove Emily had fabricated the abuse claims. Desperate, I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at a public park, and I spent the entire day anxiously waiting for the chance to get another piece of evidence against her. When I arrived, Ryan looked nervous, glancing around like he was afraid of being watched. He handed me a stack of documents, his expression grim. "This is everything I could find," he said quietly. There are text messages, emails, even photos of her and Derek discussing how to stage the video. They planned everything, down to the bruises she painted on her face. I stared at the documents, a mixture of relief and anger bubbling up inside me. It was all there, the proof I needed to finally expose her lies. I thanked Ryan, promising him that I'd use the information to clear my name. He nodded, his face tense, before slipping away into the shadows. That night, I took the evidence to Jenna. We spent hours going through each document, piecing together the full extent of Emily's deception. It was worse than I'd thought. She and Derek had been planning this for months, meticulously crafting a web of lies to ruin me and secure their own freedom. They'd even gone so far as to bribe a doctor to sign off on a fake medical report, claiming that Emily had suffered a traumatic injury at my hands. Jenna was furious, her professionalism cracking as she paced the room. "This is outrageous. It crossed every line imaginable, but this gives us a solid case. We can prove that she's been lying from the start, that she fabricated the abuse claims and manipulated the entire situation." I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. Emily was cunning, ruthless, and I knew she'd throw everything she had at me to protect her lies. But for the first time, I felt like I had a real chance to win, to clear my name and take back control of my life. We filed the evidence with the court the next day, along with a motion to dismiss her harassment claims and countersue for defamation. The legal battle was brutal, each side hurling accusations and counter-accusations, but the truth was on our side. As the days turned into weeks, the tide began to turn, and slowly, the cracks in Emily's story started to show. Her supporters grew silent, her allies began to distance themselves, and the public outrage shifted as more and more people realized the extent of her deception. I felt a sense of vindication, a relief that was almost overwhelming, as I watched her carefully constructed lies crumble around her. But Emily wasn't done yet. She'd lost the battle, but I knew she'd never admit defeat. As I left the courthouse one evening, I spotted her in the parking lot, watching me with a look of pure hatred. She approached, her voice low and venomous as she hissed, "This isn't over, Tom. I'll destroy you, even if it's the last thing I do." I stared her down, my expression calm. "Go ahead and try, Emily. I'm done letting you control my life. You can keep lying, keep scheming, but I'll keep fighting. I'm not afraid of you anymore." She sneered, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't backing down. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dark, a shadow of the woman who had once tried to destroy me. The legal battle dragged on, but with the evidence in my favor, Emily's influence continued to crumble. Jenna assured me that the court would likely rule in my favor, but the damage Emily had inflicted on my reputation and personal life couldn't be undone so easily. My job remained on indefinite leave, and the few friends I had left were still wary. But I felt stronger, more determined to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with Jenna by my side, feeling a strange sense of calm. Emily sat across the room, her face drawn and pale, her once confident smirk replaced with a look of desperation. Derek wasn't by her side this time. He had cut ties with her once our evidence surfaced. I could see the cracks in her armor, the desperation in her eyes as she realized she'd pushed too far, that her lies were finally catching up to her. Jenna presented our case with precision, laying out every detail of Emily's manipulation and deception. She showed the court the emails, the staged video, and the false reports Emily had manufactured to bolster her claims. I watched as Emily squirmed in her seat, her face contorting with anger and frustration as Jenna dismantled her story piece by piece. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I had driven her to desperation, that I had made her life unbearable. But the judge wasn't convinced. He had seen the evidence, had heard Jenna's testimony, and his expression remained stern, unmoved by Emily's pleas for sympathy. Finally, the judge ruled in my favor, dismissing Emily's claims and granting my countersuit for defamation. The court ordered her to pay damages, a significant sum that would take years for her to repay. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the gavel struck, a final punctuation on the nightmare Emily had put me through. After the hearing, I left the courthouse with Jenna, feeling an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, like I could finally put the pieces of my life back together. Jenna congratulated me, her smile warm and encouraging, and I thanked her for everything she'd done. Without her, I wouldn't have stood a chance against Emily's lies. As I walked to my car, I saw Emily standing outside, her face twisted with rage. She approached, her voice a venomous hiss as she spat. "This isn't over, Tom. You might have won in court, but I'll make sure you never have a moment's peace." I looked her in the eye, calm and resolute. "Do whatever you need to do, Emily. But know this, you can't control me anymore. Your lies didn't work, and neither will your threats. I'm done with you." She glared at me, her face contorted with hatred. But I didn't let it get to me. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, powerless and alone. I knew she would keep trying to make my life difficult, but I also knew that I had the strength to face whatever came next. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. The court ruling allowed me to return to work, and while it took time to regain my colleagues' trust, I found that most were willing to give me a second chance. Slowly but surely, I began to repair the relationships Emily had tried so hard to destroy. I also started going to therapy, determined to work through the trauma Emily had inflicted on me. I wanted to understand how I'd ended up in such a toxic relationship, to recognize the red flags I'd ignored, so I could protect myself in the future. Therapy wasn't easy, but it helped me confront the wounds I'd been carrying, and over time, I began to feel whole again. One evening, as I was sorting through old boxes, I found a photograph of Emily and me from happier times. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. She had been a huge part of my life, but she was also a painful chapter I needed to close. I took a deep breath, placed the photo back in the box, and closed the lid, determined to leave the past where it belonged. Emily continued to lash out from a distance, posting cryptic messages on social media, trying to stir up sympathy among her remaining followers. But with her reputation in ruins and her lies exposed, her influence waned. Eventually, people stopped listening, and her posts became little more than the bitter ramblings of a woman desperate to maintain control over a life she had destroyed herself. I moved on, rebuilding my world piece by piece, stronger and wiser than before. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and even began dating again, albeit cautiously. I knew I carried the scars of Emily's betrayal, but I refused to let them define me. I had survived her worst, and I had come out the other side more resilient, more determined to live a life of honesty and peace. As time passed, Emily faded from my thoughts, a distant memory of a life I had left behind. I had reclaimed my story, my sense of self, and I was finally free to embrace a future of my own making. The journey hadn't been easy, but I knew that I was stronger for having faced it, and I was ready to step forward, unburdened and unafraid.